Welcome to episode 252 of the 6G podcast. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 6G. We cover about 6 topics in roughly 30 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Anshul Sag, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Mike Dano from Ookla. Thanks again for joining me, Mike. And yes, we went a little bit longer between episodes this week. That's just the way it is. We're going to be longer between episodes again next week because I will be in Taiwan all week next week, and Mike will be on vacation. So that's just how it's going to be.
It's summertime.
Sure.
Summertime schedule.
And I'm sure tons of stuff is going to happen, but that's it. I'll kind of just kick things off with my first topic, which is that Huawei made yet another grandiose claim when it comes to their chip capabilities. I have worked with Huawei in the past. I'm very familiar with the company. And a lot of what they do with claiming supremacy is really focused on their AI chips and their smartphone chips. In the past, they claimed that they had overcome, some challenges in getting smartphone chips, but they really were just like doing workarounds. And this announcement with their semiconductor arm basically says that they will be able to build cutting edge semiconductors, which is basically 1.4 nanometer or 14 angstrom, also known as 14A. That is good. They're going to have that by 2031. But this specifically said it's about density. So really what they're talking about is being able to stack chips on top of each other to get the kind of density that you would expect from a 14A. But the reality is that TSMC is going to have that in 2028. And Intel will probably have it in 2027, 2028. They're saying that they're only 3 years behind. But the truth is that I don't believe the best way of putting it. They need to ship the chips to prove what they claim, because they've made claims in the past and they just didn't work out. And some of the things that they kind of claimed in the past were not scalable innovations. The whole point of the semiconductor industry is, yes, you can find some ways of doing things, like, using DUV instead of EUV for lithography and kind of like supercharging it, but that doesn't actually work because doesn't last very long, and the yields are not actually economically viable. So that's kind of where Huawei lives. Like, they don't actually live in a world where they have to compete with TSMC and Intel and Samsung. But really, they just need to be able to produce chips that China can use. The government is subsidizing their efforts, whether that's in yields or if it's in equipment or whatever it is. Huawei gets what they want. So we're kind of in a place where Huawei is making another claim. And, I think that we're at a place where it's not quite time to evaluate this, but I think, it's a little bit, it kind of follows suit for how Huawei does business. They call it logic folding, but it very much looks like really packaged, chips. So it doesn't really seem like anything particularly novel. They're going to have to ship it to prove that it's actually real. And then people will test it and validate it. And guess what? Every time that they made some kind of a claim, people have gone out and tested it, and it hasn't been really proven to be true. So the only thing that they really did prove was, they were able to build some of their Ascend data center chips, and they were able to target a very specific type of efficiency, and then they just made a shit ton of them, and that worked just for Huawei in the way that they were deploying it, but it wouldn't have worked for anybody else in any other scenario. So I just think that like whenever they come out with any kind of announcements, it's super important to understand that like it should be taken with a huge grain of salt. Um, and I just saw an article today actually that that, that says Peking University has made a breakthrough in chip design that supports Huawei's attempt in building these cutting edge chips, um, which is interesting because China does not have any leadership in EDA tools. It's all U.S. companies. So um, that sounds like a very coordinated effort. But at the same time, like, you know, Intel, Samsung, and and TSMC throw tens of billions of dollars at these problems on an annual basis, and they are struggling to get these things through and progress them scalable and viable economic within the industry. So for Huawei to just go, yeah, we're only 3 years behind, like we got, I don't. So I think I'll put up a foot or
It's fair to say, I mean, I would assume it's fair to say that Huawei is not the only company to make grandiose statements about what they'll do in a few years, right? And then maybe not hit those targets. Like that's common across the world, not necessarily to one company or one region.
Yeah, but I would say in the chip industry, people are extremely conservative with claims because, they have to actually deliver on them or people, they'll lose customers, right? Like you can't say I'm going to do this one thing and then just not deliver it. But Huawei is their own customer. So it's like,
Is it? But it is fair to say though that the Chinese chip making industry in general has advanced quite a bit, right? Like that's a fair thing to say. Not knowing the chip market very well at all. It's very
I would, the place where it has advanced the most is actually in memory because of the memory shortage. So these YMTCs and CMTX, like there's a lot going on because there's demand for it because price of memory is so high that like even the inferior Chinese memory, which isn't as fast or as high quality, it still gets the job done because the people just can't get to memory. There's not enough capacity. So I would say the biggest advance that I think China has made so far is in memory and just kind of getting closer and closer to where the leading edge is. They're not right there yet, but it doesn't really matter because a lot of applications don't need super fast memory.
yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of cutting edge stuff, I'll talk about my first topic, which is just a recap of the recent Network X trade show in Dallas last week, put on by Informa. Pretty good turnout. I heard it was about similar to what they saw, the attendance numbers that they saw last year. But show felt pretty lively. Lots of interesting speakers, lots of interesting topics. It really felt like, particularly on the first day, there was a whole track dedicated to 6G, and it was packed. I mean, completely full, standing room only, people out the door, super packed. They had speakers from T-Mobile, from AT&T, from some of the vendors. And it was actually quite an interesting discussion. So I actually got a lot out of it. It had the feeling of 6G is getting pretty real, and now attendees want to go and hear what they can expect. We've moved past the vision board phase of 6G, and now it's a little bit more about how they're going to go about doing it, what steps they're actually going to take, what things are going to happen first and then next. My big takeaway on the 6G side of things was that there was a long discussion about basically DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing technology, which was first introduced in the early days of 5G. It was basically a technology that allowed operators to offer some early 5G signals over sort of a 4G channel. It basically shared 4G and 5G signals in the same band, but with different time signals. And so they've got a similar technology that they're going to deploy in 6G. It's called MRSS. And boy, I can't remember what that acronym stands for, but it's basically DSS for 6G. And some of the operator representatives spoke about it. It sounds like T-Mobile is pretty interested in deploying this technology. And the goal here is to get 6G out early by leveraging existing 5G infrastructure. So it does sound like some of the early days of 6G are going to be similar to the early days of 5G, and that we'll kind of get this like hybrid, kind of looks like a new thing, but works over most of the existing stuff. Um, the difference here, though, is that I see you shaking your head, and you're right. There's a lot of criticisms about DSS in the early days of 5G being not very efficient, and that's true. Many of the executives that spoke at the Network X show last week, they said, yes, DSS was not very efficient. You actually lose about 30% of your overall capacity if you deploy DSS. And the word is that the new DSS for 6G is much more efficient. 5% loss versus 30% loss. So again, I think you're right. Same thing applies here, is that we need to see it to believe it. But it sure does sound like the MRSS or the DSS for 6G is going to be one of the first things that we'll see in the early days of 6G, this sort of sharing between 6G and 5G.
Boy, do I have opinions.
Yeah.
One, find it very interesting they chose not to call it DSS, almost like it's a swear word. I think that there will be some interesting spectrum sharing capabilities in 6G. That's what it seems like the standard is looking towards. But we really screwed the pooch when it came to NSA and 5G. This starts to sound more and more like NSA, which I don't like. And the truth is that, like, as far as we know, the 6G standard will be a standalone standard. So, I'm curious to see how DSS or MRSS works with a standalone 6G. I'm not sure. I feel like this sounds like the carriers trying to claw back some NSA from a standalone environment. But I mean, DSS is great for coverage maps, but it's terrible for everything else, or at least it was. So I just don't see this working. I would rather see a slower 6G deployment than I would a rapid 6G deployment that looks just like 5G. Because, the carriers are going to struggle to sell 6G if it looks too much like 5G. So, they already had, some carriers had trouble with 5G because it was so similar to 4G with the way they deployed it, especially with DSS. So, also DSS really ruined the experience for both 5G and 4G users. So, fairly opposed to this, unless someone can prove to me that there is a real tangible that doesn't destroy everything that we know about 6G.
Yeah, I mean, the speakers at the event seemed mostly positive on the whole thing. So and they're speaking from a position of experience, right? They've all deployed DSS to some degree, or at least experimented with it. So, they're speaking from experience, but I agree. I will say I didn't hear anything at the show about 6G that got me truly excited. It was, there, there wasn't necessarily a compelling vision that anyone was sharing. There was a lot of interesting discussions about, AI and the network and future AI services and, augmented reality glasses, sort of the same stuff that we've been talking about. But yeah, it was, I mean, I'm interested in the nuts and bolts. I'm interested in how it'll roll out, what to expect. So from that perspective, I appreciated the event in terms of, I had not heard of MRSS before. And so it was nice to get a little primer on that, understand that that may be in our future. But yeah, in terms of a big, broad, vision board type stuff for what we're hoping for 6G, nothing yet that's particularly compelling. But we've still got a couple of years. We'll see how that evolves. And we'll see also, how each operator goes to market with this kind of stuff. Cause, if somebody goes real hard, all over 6G, we're the leader in 6G, then competitors will have to respond. And, we've got a race to 6G and, you can't be left behind. And so, I think it remains to be seen how this is going to roll out. I'm not negative on it yet, but I agree. I'm going to wait and see how things roll out.
Sounds good. I guess I'll do my second topic, which is that Starcloud announced a partnership with SpaceX. Sorry, my dog's trying to bark at me.
Is excited about Starcloud, and so am I. I'll tell you that. I haven't heard about this before, so I'm interested to hear it.
So Starcloud is one of the orbital data center companies. They seem to be kind of at the forefront, from what I can tell. They're partnered with NVIDIA, it's partnered with SpaceX. They're already launching on SpaceX as well. And they say that they want to have to 88,000 orbital data centers. But in order to build these data centers, or at least operate them, they need to be connected to something. And their plan is to use 25 gigabit per second optical laser terminals to interconnect them with each other and with SpaceX's Starlink network. So that way they're able to move data across, the different data centers that they have in the cloud, in space, literally cloud computing, and they're gonna build these into their Starcloud 2 and Starcloud 3 data centers, and they're trying to deploy the Starcloud 3s on SpaceX's Starship. So they're very closely aligned with SpaceX, which makes sense why they would, have this partnership on the networking. And they're going to use at least 50 of these mini lasers for 25 satellites. I assume one for uplink, one for downlink. And they're going to kind of not talk about the financials of it, so that's not really clear. But these are for their larger 450 kilogram spacecraft, which are much larger kilowatts of power, and much bigger than their 60 kilogram Starcloud ones that they deployed in November with SpaceX. So it's interesting. I think this does lend a little bit more credibility to some of the data centers in space conversation. And I think it, maybe helps SpaceX a little bit with their IPO, that they can show that, we can supply some of our IP and sell it to people, and that they are going to use our Starlink, network for more than just broadband and direct to device communications. So that's interesting. But they're also trying to raise money. So they're also trying to raise another $200 million. And that would, increase their valuation once again. And they still have, competition from Viasat, which also uses Starlink laser links. And that will potentially in 2027. So there's actually a lot of Starlink connected satellites. So this isn't a first, but it's interesting because they're one of the more prominent space data center companies.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, I think that space data center stuff it just feels so science fiction. It's almost hard to wrap your mind around it. There's so many issues involved in running a data center in space. Well, what about this? What about that? Will the chips get fried? Is it going to melt? Is it going to freeze? So many questions. But every time I hear about something, a new thing like this, I just have to take a step back and say, thank goodness that a economy seems to be developing around space and space travel. I feel like this is something it's just so interesting if we can really get this kind of an economy off the ground, into space, if these kinds of things actually do pay off, I can't imagine it's going to be a bad thing. The idea of uh, you know, lunar economy, lunar operations, space travel, rocket, ROI, like all those things are just fascinating. And so if we can get closer to that, every fundraising, announcement like this, or every new startup that is targeting the space industry, I think is only a good thing at this point. I mean, eventually, the winners and losers will be decided, but at this point, I think interest in space is not a bad thing. And that leads me to my second topic, which I had put on here because we weren't around at the end of last week, which was when SpaceX released its IPO filing. And so we got a much clearer look at, SpaceX overall business and revenues. Not only, the rocket industry or the rocket business, but Starlink and, XAI and Twitter and all the different businesses that fall under that umbrella. We got a closer look at their revenues. But I had I mean, it's a very long document, the SpaceX IPO filing from last week. Lots of stuff to sift through and have a look at. But my two big takeaways from that document was that fully 61% of all of SpaceX's total revenues from 2025 came from Starlink. I just think that's a really remarkable number. That there's so many things that are going on right now at SpaceX, from AI, data centers in space to running a social media platform. But here we see that 61% of the company's overall revenues are actually coming directly from Starlink. It's quite remarkable. We know Starlink has about 10 million customers globally, and it's really generating some serious revenue. So that's pretty interesting to see the momentum that Starlink business has, really, in terms of actual revenues that are officially reported now in this IPO filing. And then the other big takeaway that I had from that document, at least in my little corner of things, is just a few nuggets about Starlink Mobile. And as we know, Starlink Mobile is different than Starlink Fixed, right? Starlink Fixed is, sending internet signals to fixed internet receivers for homes and offices. Starlink Mobile is satellites going straight to smartphones. It is a mobile service. It's very different. Speeds are, it's basically text messaging at this point, so no real data services. But SpaceX did report that they have a total of 7.4 million monthly unique devices for the Starlink mobile service across 30 different countries. And so that really does help provide some context and some borders around that business. Still very early days. They're still with the first generation of satellites for that Starlink mobile business. They're planning to launch a whole new second generation constellation of satellites for Starlink mobile. Those are coming in the next few years, contingent on the Starship rocket launches. But getting these little insights into the Starlink business is really interesting ahead of the IPO, which is just I think a few weeks away. So yeah, I think that for me, that was a real big news event over the past couple of days, was getting these numbers out of the Starlink IPO or the SpaceX IPO filing. Really interesting stuff.
Yes. I will say, as somebody who is a big space fan, I have always told myself I would buy into the SpaceX IPO whether I can do that now because of all the things that they own is unlikely. But also, I think that there's just a lot of interesting assumptions in this S1 filing. The reality is that, like, they say that they have a $28 trillion TAM. And like 26 of that is like data center stuff and AI. So, um, and I think, they struck a $1.5 billion a month agreement with Anthropic to lease Colossus Compute, which tells me that, SpaceX, aka XAI, maybe isn't using their own infrastructure, but they at least have it that they can sell it and make money off of it. Um, but I just my biggest problem with this IPO is I love the space stuff. I think the space stuff is incredible. I just think it's poisoned by the money pit that is XAI and the money pit that is Twitter. And, you know, of course, Elon loves to, cross pollinate across his companies, and, you know, buy things from himself. SpaceX owns a lot of Teslas. Um, I just think that it's not the greatest valuation. I don't think it's a very accurate valuation. I don't know how else to put it. Um, I think it's overvalued. Uh, but people get really excited about this stuff, and there's a lot of SpaceX and Tesla fanboys. Um, just like we've encountered some of the AST Space Mobile ones. Um, so people are very rabid about their opinions on this company, but um, you know, I have been in and around SpaceX's orbit for a very long time. Because to your point, I'm a big space nerd. Um, I've been to their headquarters in Hawthorne. Um, I was there to supercharge a long time ago, which they no longer have a supercharger there. I ran into Elon at the Eureka Burger that was there. Yeah, I just think that like it's a very weird environment. And the other thing is, Elon owns something like 93% of Class B shares. So um, he's effectively untouchable, giving him 85% of voting shares. So, like, it's just not a structure that sounds really good for investors. And I just don't know if I really see this IPO shaking out the way people want it to. Um, I think there's a lot of companies out there that who have valuations that are somewhat justified based on the state of the market today, whether it's, the memory companies or the logic companies or the networking companies. There's a lot of concrete revenue, like NVIDIA, for example. Why is NVIDIA the most valuable company in the world? Well, they're printing about $60 billion a quarter, right? Like that's crazy. So that's why I just feel like SpaceX is still losing money and they're trying to IPO. And like space and satellites are not they have not historically been a very profitable business. And a lot of companies have gone bankrupt. So I just think it's like valuing this company at $1 trillion is what I think we're at right now. A lot of people are going to buy into this, and some people are going to be bought into this and not even know that they are, because institutional investors are going to buy into this. So, I actually went to school for economics, and I'm very skeptical of a lot of valuations. But, $28 trillion, that's not a TAM that I agree with, let alone 22 trillion for enterprise applications and 2 trillion for AI infrastructure. So, yeah, it is. I wish the valuations are as stratospheric as their satellites.
There we go. I mean, it's true, right? And uh, what I think is interesting is that a lot of these, a lot of stock price movement in general is not necessarily based on concrete numbers and obvious market dynamics. It's based on the stories that they're telling. Oh, we're going to chase this opportunity and this opportunity is great. Oh, this trend is going to affect us in a good way. And that is what drives a lot of it. So, I would say it's really impressive the story that SpaceX has managed to tell about its opportunities in order to drive this kind of interest in it. Because, when that IPO filing came out, it raised the share price of all, space companies from Viasat to AST. I mean, everybody enjoyed a wave of interest in, space technology. And so, it's uh, as a person who I think one of my main jobs is storytelling, as far as I can tell. I'm not entirely sure, but it is impressive to see a very successful story being told ahead of this IPO. Now, you're right. Whether this actually pans out and, provides an actual hard return on investment, hard to say. But watching the story being crafted is pretty interesting.
I guess that will kind of lead us into my final topic, which is not as exciting as some of these developments. It's actually around AT&T introducing a new plan. They call it Build a Plan, which is really interesting because it's literally like your base plan is $15. Um, and that $15 includes unlimited talk, unlimited text, and 1 gig of data. So this is very much for people who want to connect to the network but do not use their phones very much. Um, and 1 gig of data does not come out to very much on a daily basis. It's probably basically enough to just do email and maybe some light browsing. But you could also add things to the plan. You can add 5 gigs of data for $5, which is, I think, fairly reasonable. 15 gigs is $10, and then you can go unlimited for $20. So you could have an unlimited plan for $35, which is fairly competitive with a lot of the, prepaid guys. But you would be getting an AT&T plan. They do say that their unlimited plans that they're offering will temporarily slow data if the network is busy. So it's a deprioritized QoS. I don't know what level, but deprioritized nonetheless. There's also the addition of hotspot. You can add anywhere from 5 to 50 gigs of hotspot per month, which is interesting because I think you can possibly like add a hotspot on a monthly basis. So if you're never going to be traveling, you could maybe add a hotspot for just a month that you need it, because this plan is not months. It's not an annual commitment. It's not even a monthly commit. Is purely a subscription based on when you need it. So um, I think this is a really interesting idea from AT&T. It kind of goes back to the old days of adding these things on. If you remember when we had, data and hotspot were kind of tack-ons. They were expensive tack-ons, but they were tack-ons. So it's like a debundling of smartphone service to hit a lower price point. But I could see, the base plan with 5 gigs of data, it's $20. Not bad. That'll work for a lot of people. My wife, before I met her, was splitting 5 gigs with her two brothers. Obviously, she's on my unlimited plan now. So she lives a normal life, but you did a lot of interesting things to save on data. Some people like literally don't need it, and I think there's definitely a market for this. But I also think that like once you start adding all the things to it, it might be better just to do a regular.
Kudos to AT&T, right, for introducing a slightly new charging model, or at least one that is not necessarily from a brand like this. You're right. This is most of this stuff is readily available from some prepaid operators, but it's nice to see some new pricing options from some of the bigger players, from some of the bigger brands in the space. I will say that at one point we've got a family of 4, 2 teenagers. We had paid off our phones, and I was really excited because now we had an opportunity to change services and go to a month to month, maybe save some money. We ended up saving quite a bit of money. We moved to a prepaid operator and limited data. We each had 15 gigabytes a month, but that ended up being not enough for my 2 teenagers. And I'll tell you that. And so we actually managed to, we had long conversations about how to reduce data usage. But yeah, if you ever want to create friction within your family unit, get your teenagers onto a limited data plan when they literally have no idea how the internet works, why video consumes more data than texting. They had no clue. They just had never even given it a second thought. And so I'm happy to say that now we have returned to completely unlimited data. I do not have to explain to my wife why she can't watch Netflix while we're traveling. It's just, it ended up being, I thought we'd save all this money. It'd be great. They don't use that much anyway. And it ended up being absolutely not a great call. And so kudos to those who can get by with limited data amounts. But it turns out, I thought my family was one of those. It is not. It's much better to get on unlimited data and not have to explain to your kids why they just need to stop doing that already.
More data, please.
It's just exactly like that. I would try to explain like, well, here's why. And everybody, they just got angry. Everybody got angry at me for about a year and a half until we finally traded in our old phones, got some new phones. We got it much better. Highly recommend.
Funny, but I'm
Yeah.
sorry it was at your expense.
Oh boy, yeah. Being your IT support for your family it's highs and lows, mostly
I'm
lows.
very familiar with that.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll move on to my last topic, which is another little takeaway from the Network X show. On one of the panels that I got to moderate was a speaker from Amazon Leo. Speaking of satellites, Amazon Leo, of course, is the satellite internet play from Amazon. They too are planning to launch thousands of low Earth orbit satellites, just like Starlink, and offer consumer and business satellite internet at really quite remarkable speeds based on the type of receiver that you buy from Amazon. And so I got a few insights in my conversations during that session with the Amazon Leo representative. He suggested that there could be a launch in the third quarter timeframe, which lines up with Amazon's plans to launch later this year. You know, they had hoped to launch last year, couldn't get enough satellites up, so it looks like they're hopefully on track to get enough satellites launched so that they can make a commercial launch happen by the third quarter of this year. I did see that New Glenn is hoping to launch another 48 satellites from Amazon in the coming weeks. So that was interesting to hear. Also, I had many questions for them about the direct-to-device marketplace and the Amazon acquisition of Globalstar, but deal hasn't closed yet. Could not say anything about it. So no further details there. But the speaker was very clear to make it, or wanted to make it very clear that Amazon Leo is hoping to be a partner to the telecom industry, not a competitor. I thought that was an interesting position given some of the somewhat competitive language that Starlink is going to market with. Amazon Leo is not taking that approach. They're positioning themselves very much as a partner to other players in the telecom industry, and not a competitor. So I thought that was interesting. And the final thing that I got from that discussion was that the Amazon Leo is very keen to leverage other Amazon businesses, such as Amazon Prime, Amazon Video. Um, they've already built much of their service on top of Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, cloud infrastructure. So certainly, they're right now their focus is on launching enough satellites, but it'll be interesting to see as Amazon Leo progresses into the market later this year, next year, how exactly they leverage all the other businesses that Amazon runs, from shopping to video to everything else. So I thought that was some interesting insights, as we all get ready for the Amazon Leo launch later this year. It was interesting to get a few more details about how they're going to go to market.
Yeah, I definitely think it'll be interesting to see how this pans out, especially when you consider that, like, they're not really on the timeline that they want to be. But they also very clearly want to be working with the carriers and not be what SpaceX is. So I'm hoping we get that closure. I think they said 2027 is probably when that deal will close. But what I really want to know is, what are the new terms of the deal with Apple, and how does that look for them compared to what it used to be with Globalstar?
Yeah. Yeah. And that once that deal closes, I'm assuming we're going to get a lot more details about Amazon and Globalstar. So yeah, remains to be seen, but certainly interesting and well worth watching for sure.
Definitely. And I think that kind of wraps us up for this week. Mm, also, we hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. And if anyone out there would like to provide a specific topic for future podcasts, please reach out to me reach out to us on social media. Mike is at Mike, I'm at Munchosod. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and please tune again next episode in about a week or so.